GHHI is hoping to bring together advocacy community around defining how lead poisoning prevention and eradication is going to be advanced and addressed during, I think, this critical inflection point on funding that is coming through the American Jobs Plan, the President's announcement on budget, and legislation, as well as the existing monies that have hit the street to support cities and states. And so we are, if we can go to the next slide here, Michael. I just want to go to the agenda. I want to welcome our partners from WEACT and Corinne Taylor, who's joined us today, and our team to outline the work that we are hoping to do. But, you know, as we look at the HUD American Healthy Housing Study that came out of 2011 and will soon be released, a 2019 version to be released, HUD defined the issue just of lead-based paint in housing and imminent hazards for families in America making less than $35,000 a year to be 12 million households needing immediate attention to address lead hazards, not to mention issues of lead in soil and, of course, issues of lead in water. That 12 million household need relates to $170 billion of need to eradicate lead, and to do it in a shorter period of time than to incrementally continue generationally, allowing it to be a drip, drip, drip answer to what we know is one of the most tragic, costly, yet entirely preventable issues in the United States. One of the concerns that was raised for me coming out of the many good things out of the American Jobs Plan, including $45 billion for the replacement of lead service lines, was the more vague references than we would like to lead exposure in housing. No definition or articulation of exactly what we're going to do on lead paint abatement, eradication, hazard control, remediation, whatever we want to call it. And we think it is so critically important because it is one of the most transformational and tangible things that we can do to address health and racial equity and opportunity in the country. So we are really pushing to ensure that we can get strong articulated money for the reduction of lead exposure through paint and water, make sure that we do advocacy that is transparent and engaging for all of us who care about this issue, to work together in that, to share strategies, to share proposals. But we also want to address not only what's in the Biden-Harris American Jobs Plan, which is immense and full of opportunity, and the proposed budget, discretionary budget, but proposed congressional legislation, which we'll talk about today as well. So we hope that we will get to those issues with you, engaged in questions. I know we've also will be covering some of that proposed legislation, get to aligned key messages and organizing and communication needs to ensure that we do not miss this moment for the generations of families and communities that have long suffered from the ill-conceived and unjust policies that have poisoned so many children, and instead changed this as a big platform for opportunity. So before we get started a little bit further, I'd like to invite Corinne, if you wanted to say a few words on behalf of WEACT in this, and WEACT is a long-held partner and friend in this fight. And thank you, Corinne, for being here today.
Hi, good afternoon, everyone. My name is Corinne Taylor, Director of Federal Legislative Affairs for WEACT for Environmental Justice. WEACT is an EJ org organization based and founded in Northern Manhattan, the Harlem, West Harlem area of New York. A big part of our work has been our fight for healthy homes, not only in New York City and New York State, but nationally. And as a part of that, our federal priorities this year have been around not only supporting legislation like the Environmental Justice for All Act, but particularly the Environmental Justice Legacy Pollution Cleanup Act that Cory Booker's office has been leading. And a big part of that is remediating and providing substantial funding for addressing healthy homes and addressing lead paint, and not only in paint, but also in water infrastructure. As we've been, I think many of us are at least cautiously excited about the Biden administration's Build Back Better plan and their emphasis and all government approach to addressing environmental justice and climate justice, and particularly using this as a vehicle to help address healthy homes and also create jobs and provide opportunities for communities to be a part of those solutions. In reviewing the budget and reviewing the jobs plan, I think there's some key opportunities for us to lift up. And then there is some legislation I think that's been introduced, legacy pollution being one, but a number of other bills that I think our coalition can just coalesce around to push. I think the challenge this year, and just being honest, is the realities of what the House and Senate look like, and whether or not there is substantial support to move things through reconciliation. And if not through reconciliation, through passing something in the Senate. And the window, of course, for that is, everyone's looking at a year to, within the next 2 years before midterms, for some really important steps to move things that we think are critical to communities. So really just happy and appreciative of Ruth Ann and the Green and Healthy Homes Initiatives, and just your work and including us in that. So however, we can be of assistance and just move collectively, I think we have some great opportunities. So thanks for letting me share.
Of course, and we've been partners and friends for 30 years, and for some who weren't born then, and some who are going to be doing this work 30 years from now, but hopefully on new issues, because we will have taken care of some. I think this is our greatest window of opportunity. We are going to do these calls very periodically throughout this process of the American Jobs Plan and the budgets, and continue them not only on lead and on key focus, but our next call will be on climate, health, energy, climate, energy, and healthy housing, and the work there. And what we want to gather is where we need common areas of push and understanding. So we hope that we will be able to add value by bringing this together. Much of today's call was inspired by both the American Jobs Plan and our reaction to that, as well as the Environmental Justice Legacy Pollution Act, which we will talk about, and the need to advance other legislation such as the Lead Safe Kids Act that Emily Benfer has joined us also to talk about. But Michael, do you want to go to the next slides here? So we've talked about the defining the need. I jumped ahead a little bit there. If we can go to the next slide here. So let me, I think what has us really focused on how do we define the lead remediation dollars that for HUD, how are we defining those dollars that will be needed for CDC, EPA, to have a comprehensive approach to lead poisoning prevention. In the American Jobs Plan, there is $45 billion in the EPA drinking water revolving fund, water infrastructure, and I think there's actually has a bandwidth that it could go a little higher. We think this is an excellent opportunity for jobs. It is an excellent opportunity in the eradication of lead poisoning and its impact, especially in schools and childcare. But our concern here is that lead service line replacement alone will not make the dent that we need to be able to eliminate childhood lead poisoning and lead poisoning in general, as a major public health threat, and that you have to go to a stronger articulation of what we're going to do around lead-based paint and housing as the predominant source of poisoning. I think that is universally agreed is the predominant source of poisoning. And while in the $213 billion to preserve and produce more affordable and sustainable places to live, there's a reference in the water area around lead exposure in homes. There's no defined area for lead-based paint. And even if you took the $20 billion for the Neighborhood Homes Investment Act and put it all to lead paint, we would fall seriously, seriously short of the need. And we think that the marker ought to be at least where we are on lead service line replacement, or what we would like to push for is that as a floor moving forward. I want to talk about that just a little bit, Michael, if you can go to the next slide. So in the proposed legislation that you'll see from Congressman, from Senator Booker and Congressman Keishan, there is a proposal to define $45 billion out of the $200 billion to address environmental justice issues. $45 billion will capture, by our estimates, or if you take HUD's estimate of $12,000 per home, somewhere around 3,750,000 to 4 million homes, and will create, by our estimate, 46,800 jobs in a year to perform that work annually over 10 years. The Pollution Act also has in it $1 billion to address housing-related hazards, healthy housing-related hazards in Native American homes. Clearly, we need more, but what we think can happen if we are able to get these markers in concert with the American Jobs Plan is that we're then able to leverage through monies that are already going to cities and states out of the Reconciliation Act, monies that are coming in from other housing programs and other investments at a community level that will leverage out the $170 billion over the next 10 years. So we have sent a sign-on letter out to and have gotten tremendous support from the Trust for America's Health, American Public Health Association, We Act, National Housing Trust, and others in the on and on and on, good organizations to support this. So we've gained a lot of traction, both in the environmental justice field, the energy efficiency field, and in the healthy housing arena to support this. So we thank everybody who is supporting this legislation. But we're also asking you to support our efforts to reach out to your congresspeople and let them know of the need to include in an articulated fashion the things that are laid out in this, this bill and the others that you'll see here around lead paint and around healthy housing. So it's defined as we move forward with funding and not left to discretion, because we think we cannot leave the issue of lead poisoning prevention to discretionary measures any further. You want to go to the next slide? There also in the legislative arena is the the Home Lead Safety Tax Credit Act of 2021. This is Sheldon Whitehouse to allow for upper, middle and upper income families or those who want to make their own investments to capture federal tax credits for doing window replacement, lead hazard control with a maximum of $4,000 per unit. And the tax credit would be for 50% of the cost. We think this could be timely to be in part of a overall package. It is a piece of legislation originally promoted as far back as 2007. but we think we have to get tools in the hands of those who are not eligible for grant money. You want to go to the next slide? So Emily, you're on the line. Do you want to talk about the status of the Let's Safe for Kids Act, and before we get to open discussion on where this stands?
I'd be happy to. Thank you so much, Ruth Ann. So the Let's Safe Housing for Kids Act, just by way of background, there are 450,000 federally assisted housing units that were built before 1978 that have children under the age of 6 living in them right now. And of those, it's estimated that 57,000 have lead-based paint hazards that are currently active and unmitigated. Yet in the federal regulations require that children residing in tenant-based rental assistance programs must be lead poisoned at the CDC reference value before any meaningful lead hazards are identified or controlled. So risk assessments only occur after a child is poisoned. And prior to that, they only conduct what we know is an ineffective practice of visual assessments. So the Lead Safe Housing for Kids Act, which has been introduced in the House, and Noelle Porter from National Housing Law Project will talk about that in a moment. It requires that lead hazard risk assessments and control occur in all federally assisted housing pre-1978, excluding federal mortgage insurance programs prior to occupancy by a child under the age of 6. It also gives families the ability to relocate on an emergency basis where a unit has uncontrolled lead hazards that the landlord is refusing to repair without losing their housing assistance. And it authorizes appropriations for a number of factors. In addition, the version being introduced this session also includes a demonstration project to really study the cost of abatement. So the federal government will provide funding for abatement in the voucher program and study that and provide the data that they collect on their website and in a number of reports. And at the same time, it also requires education and written information, notice to families about fair housing rights and how fair housing rights interact with lead-based paint. And then it provides for appropriations, not only for the cost of the bill itself, but also for training, for a national education campaign on the Fair Housing Act and lead-based paint, and for enforcement activities as well. And Noelle is here to give you an update on where it stands right now in Congress.
Sure. Thanks so much, Emily. My name is Noelle Porter. I'm the Director of Government Affairs for the National Housing Law Project. And I just wanted to give a brief update on where this stands. I will make a clarification. So as Emily said, the House version of the bill, which in the previous Congress was introduced in October of last year by Representatives McEachin and Chewy Garcia. And that version includes this demonstration project, which means that the federal government would be committed to paying for the identified remediation or necessary remediation. In the prior Congress, in the 115th Congress, the House and Senate introduced the same bill, meaning the House and Senate bills were the same, and they did not include this demonstration project. And so what would happen was the lead safe hazard or the lead hazard would be identified, and the landlord would be responsible, or the owner would be responsible for remediation. And we found that it was causing some tension where landlords were opting out of, say, Section 8 programs because they didn't want to be forced to identify a problem they'd have to solve. So in May of 2019 in the Senate, let me make sure I get every one of these important names. Senators Durbin, Tim Scott from South Carolina, Senator Menendez, Young from Indiana, Duckworth, Kane, Portman, and Tina Smith from Minnesota all introduced bipartisan legislation for the Lead Safe Housing for Kids Act. And that bill did not identify these demonstration project funds for the cost of remediation. So we're currently having conversations with Senate offices to see if we can advance similar versions of the bill in both the House and Senate, or if we need to make some adjustments to the text to continue that bipartisan legacy of the bills. So the House will have a hearing on the 14th, so this week, that includes a markup of the demonstration project-based version of the Lead Safe Housing for Kids Act, and will include reintroduction by by Representatives McEachin and Garcia. And then we'll continue negotiations with the different offices from the Senate who had originally signed on to the bill in 2019 on the Senate side, hopefully encouraging them to merge the text to find a similar ground with the House bill as it currently stands. And then we can move forward with introduction on both sides of the chamber and to really hoping to pass this legislation in the 117th Congress.
Thank you for that. I want to come back during our discussion to talk about how the $40 billion for public housing that's in the American Jobs Plan may help support some of the work here. And obviously the GAO report that came out that was so devastating about what is happening now in public housing, obviously needing this. I want to turn to my colleague, Michael McKnight, who's going to take us through the next couple of bills before we circle back to Senator Booker and Congressman McEachin's Environmental Justice Legacy Pollution Act.
Thanks, Ruth Ann. Yeah, a couple other bills to go over. One is the Get the Lead Out Act. This was introduced in the last Congress in 2019 by Representative Tim Ryan. This was during his campaign, his presidential campaign was during when this bill got introduced. But it was $95 billion over 10 years to address lead, both lead paint and lead service lines, and was one of the sort of the largest bills coming out of the last Congress on this issue. We're not sure yet whether or not there's going to be a reintroduction of this bill, but if we've got advocates that are in Ohio, I definitely encourage you to reach out to Tim Ryan's office around that bill. And then there is a bill that's looking to be introduced this Congress by Congressman Jared Golden from Maine. This is actually a sort of a component of a bill that was introduced last Congress called the Lead-Free Future Act, which set aside about $12.5 billion for lead hazard control. But this bill would really be focusing on sort of the state and local jurisdictions and what they are doing in terms of policies to address elevated blood lead levels. And so basically this bill would create sort of a requirement for those state and local jurisdictions that were seeking funding from HUD's Office of Lead Hazard Control and Healthy Homes or the CDC Childhood Lead Poisoning Prevention Program to ensure that their sort of levels in which they do actions on lead would have to be consistent with the CDC reference level, as I'm sure the advocates on this call, are aware of sort of that CDC reference level that was established in 2012 that may or may not be adjusted fairly soon. But back in 2012, it got set to 5 micrograms per deciliter on sort of, and that was established based on sort of the 97.5th percentile of sort of children. We know that there's no safe level of lead. So this bill would be basically requiring states and local jurisdictions to sort of move where their sort of policies kick in and to make sure that it is consistent with that CDC level. So right now that would mean 5. So if you had states that were sort of lagging behind and they still had 10, 15, 20 micrograms per deciliter until their sort of actions take in, they would not be eligible for the funding from the HUD and the CDC. I'll turn it back to you, Ruth Ann.
Go to the next slide here. So, I think there's 2 things that we are trying to pull everybody together, and we're going to want to hear from folks who want to share sort of strategies that they're employing and how we might employ the more unified and strong strategy together. But in the discretionary budget that has come out separate from the American Jobs Plan and separate from the proposed Environmental Legacy Pollution Act of 2021 is the president's skinny budget that has come out, right? And what I think is really notable here is progress, that we've gone from 360 million in FY21 to a proposed 400 million in FY22. And while we've been, GHHI has been holding out a marker for 500 million a year as a baseline, we are really happy to see the progress that has happened in the last few years, although it will take us decades upon decades at this rate to still address that $170 billion price tag that HUD projects is needed to eliminate lead poisoning as a major public health threat. This is significant and working in tandem, obviously, here. We're still awaiting the details on the CDC program, but obviously needing to continue to increase support in lead and healthy homes, and had an opportunity to meet with the new director of the Lead and Healthy Homes program and the environmental health leaders at CDC recently, who I think are building out a more proactive program, because we have been able to bring back collectively, thanks to the good work of so many on the phone, significant funding back to CDC, but not nearly enough to have every state strongly supported in these efforts. The EPA, which has put recently a great effort out under the new EPA administrator, we see increases in the budget for water infrastructure that is aligning with the larger American Jobs Plan, going up to $3.6 billion a year, and looking still for the other requests on the environmental justice programs, the lead poisoning prevention programs. And an area that we pay special attention to in weatherization, because of its elements of aligned health and safety, we're up to 400 million. So matching that with the lead hazard control, we start to get a better picture of advanced work on holistic, healthy housing work, where we think there's great opportunity. And I know Senator Granholm has a significant interest in lead poisoning prevention, as she did as governor. And so the alignment on that we are hopeful for. You want to go to the next slide here, Mike? So we want to get alignment. I don't know if you have bullets on this, Mike, or just this.
And this is really just for the kind of the discussion section.
Great, thank you. So we really want to get very clear and hear from those on the phone. There's so many that are working on this around alignment on messages of ask in the American Jobs Plan, or what may turn out to be another reconciliation budget if we're not able to get past the filibuster. Support clearly for the environmental Justice Pollution Act, Legacy Pollution Act, which we think is key because that focuses deeply on advancing the efforts on lead poisoning pollution and those other impacts that have happened to communities to undermine potential for so long, that have been really unjust and at some point racist in the approach, and really starts to reverse that work by getting into the funding that needs to go in community, hiring communities, ensuring the ownership of the work by communities that have been impacted, and then the regular budget work. So I wanted to open this up just for key messaging or work that's been happening. I think I saw, for example, Dave Jacobs from the Center for Healthy Housing was joining us. If Dave, I don't know if you're on the phone here, but you've done this a long time. I'd love to have you share in that work, or others that want to talk about this or ask questions around how we propose moving forward. So let me pause and open the table. Any takers on this? Well, let me tell you what we are going to be doing and see if we're going to be providing a toolkit to folks who are on this call and others around templated letters that can go to your congressional offices, key talking points. Yes, please. Sorry, I thought I heard someone. So we want to provide key talking points around efforts here on the case for advancing and articulating better the monies around lead poisoning prevention and healthy housing in the American Jobs Plan, including calculations on jobs and types of jobs created, and how we got to those calculations, and some good work that was done with the Blue Green Alliance and others for the Lead Summit in 2016, and having those vetted. But also, what are the key outcomes that we see? We do think we're pushing support for the Lead Safe Kids Act, for the Environmental Legacy Pollution Act, and others that have very tangible ways of getting to prevention and aligning that, as well as support for the budget process. All of this is going to be a slog. It's big. It's the biggest infrastructure investment since the Roosevelt administration. Important work that's happening outside of lead, obviously, that needs to happen in this country around roads and bridges, but also around climate and energy. But we think strongly, as I said, we're also going to have ways to talk about this in terms of health, educational, economic outcomes, as well as how do we move from health and racial disparities to equity and opportunity, including getting our kids in the classroom healthy, ready to learn, earn, and compete for a lifetime. So we be looking for that toolkit to come out. And I've got a lot of folks on my team who I know are busily writing down that we've now promised to get that out. And thank you in advance for that good work. But we'd like to take your questions on any of this if you have it.
Ruth Ann, while we wait to see if folks have questions, maybe just one comment around sort of if the Environmental Justice Legacy Pollution Cleanup Act ends up going through the reconciliation route. Senator Sherrod Brown's, who's chair of the Banking Committee, is going to be very important, and so that's just for our advocates in Ohio. Really sort of weighing in with Senator Brown's office about that bill would be very important now in case it has to go down that route. And then a question for you, Ruth Ann, maybe if you can talk a little bit about sort of the any discussions that you've had with HUD about basically them being prepared to sort of be involved in an investment at this scale and what that means.
I will answer that, but I wanted to give Karine an opportunity to talk about the Environmental Legacy Pollution Act. Anything you want to say on that, Karine, from the work that WEAC's been doing to get support as well?
Well, for sure, the intention as it is right now is to have it go through the reconciliation process. So that outreach, I think, will be critical. There had originally been some provisions that would not have made it through reconciliation, particularly around cumulative impacts. And so that was removed in this iteration of the bill this year. It also had originally been asking for $100 billion of investments, and now it's $200 billion, I think, reflecting just some of the outreach from folks in this coalition to increase some funding opportunities. But from what I understand from Booker's office, dealing specifically with Adam Zipkin there, the intention is for, the feeling is that it can make it through reconciliation. So the outreach, I think, to the banking committee and other types, I think would be critical.
And if I'm right, Corinne, it really is going to it's getting in front of two committees, I think, EPW and banking, if I recall.
Yeah.
And we're really looking at who we know on both of those committees, and there's lots of good supporters, including Jack Reed and Chris Van Hollen and Ben Cardin from Maryland, our senators here, there that are quite supportive of helping to advance this. Corinne, in your experience, the timeline of advancing this bill?
I believe it's going to be reintroduced later this month, I think closer to Earth Day. And, so much is happening on the appropriation side. And with these budget priorities, I think we should see some movement. I guess the goal is to have it move in parallel with some of the other appropriations requests.
Well, Anthony Santiago just declared Adam Zipkin the man. So
yeah,
folks, please reach out. And, if the administration comes in with a way to define this level of scale, clearly through their work, there may be efforts to combine those efforts or work them together through this package. So, Michael, you asked about our discussions with HUD, and I think they have been, in our discussions with the Office of Healthy Housing, have all we've heard is really positive feedback about the ability and dissemination plan to go to scale, and to ensure that we could, on a 10-year time frame, how would we disseminate the monies out, make sure that we have the contractor capacity and the ability to not choke the system, if you will, while putting this to work. But I think most mayors and most county executives and governors are looking at scaled operations. Coming out of COVID, there couldn't be a greater importance of getting into housing repair, especially around healthy housing. So there is a great deal of planning to go on, and that is happening around this. But HUD itself, we hope, will be a lead advocate within the administration of asking for this work. When he was senator, Senator Biden was critical in taking Senator Kennedy's proposal to ban the sale of lead-based paint for residential housing on an interstate basis and helping to push for adoption. We think, given what we know of the goals of the Biden administration, I think we all know, around racial equity, around economic opportunity, around a post-COVID response, nothing could fit a plan better than this work, which is shovel ready to go, and all of us will be working to scale to do it. So I think we did have a hand raised from Marcus Sibley, please.
Good afternoon. Thank you.
And where are you from, Marcus?
Hello, everyone. My name is Marcus Sibley. I am from New Jersey. I'm the New Jersey State Conference NACP, the Environmental and Climate Justice Chairman for the state. And I also chair a few other environmental coalitions in the state. I've been enjoying this conversation, but I just wanted to kind of raise one point. These are tremendous numbers that we're talking about. And I like to be very realistic and honest with people when I speak. Being in the NACP, being on the front line, there are many over the years, many things that have happened that have been in the name of protecting and fighting for frontline communities. But I don't want to say that it just doesn't always get to the ground. And it's important for me, especially when I see billions being thrown around. I'm very curious about what is the oversight after? Like if it gets passed, what are the measures for oversight after to make sure that the dollars make it to the communities, that every single one of these bills, like I said, I chair 3 different statewide coalitions. I'm on meetings all the time. Everyone is always using the premise of these frontline communities, but Does the money always make it to the community? No, it doesn't. I see inflated budgets. I see our green organizations operate like corporations where there's so many different um, mechanisms at play, so many consultants, so many this, so many that. When it gets down to the actual remediation, there's little money for the people on the ground that are doing the work. So when I see billions thrown around, I'm excited, but another part of me knows how serious greed is. So I'm very curious about how the oversight is thought about when it comes to these measures. And thank you so much for fielding my question.
Sorry, Marcus, I was muted to make sure that you could be heard without noise in the background. Thank you for that. I'll start. I'll ask Karine, and I'll ask anyone on the phone also for advice on ensuring that we are dotting the I's and crossing the T's on this. But, you know, one of the big inflection points for me and for GHHI in our work around lead is we're often noted as helping to lead a 99% reduction of childhood lead poisoning in the city of Baltimore and the state of Maryland. That Duke University says returned $44.5 billion back to our economy. But what has really caused us to pause on that, which all sounds good and good news, is how many of those dollars were tagged back and directed to and ensured that they got to contractors in community, contractors of color in Black and brown communities, how many of the contractor companies doing the work are owned or Black and brown owned, and who is driving the work and the dollars. And it became a just resounding question for us about how can we ensure that this legislation do that? And there's been a particular conversation I know that we have had, and I am certain that Peggy Shepard and Karine Taylor have had with the congressman and the senator both on this, is to ensure that we have ways to tag those dollars and not just rely on Section 3, which requires the hiring of low-income workers. You know, part of this is to build a contracting core that can actually grow and prosper as we get an answer. So we are trying to be diligent in this, build that into this legislation. But I would love to work with Derek Johnson and you on measures that we can take around oversight. They did a pretty good job in ARA around setting standards for oversight to ensure how dollars were spent. And I think this does call out for that. Karine, do you want to pop in? Please do.
Yeah, no worries. And I know to Marcus's point, even coming out of the payroll protection plan and the COVID relief, there's so many examples of mismanagement when there's that mass rush to just get money out of the door. And so we too are concerned about transparency and accountability in the process to when these funds are allocated. I know for sure in the EJ Legacy Pollution Cleanup Act, there was some additional language that was added recently around direct hire, local hire, and then also ensuring that these are good paying jobs, you know, beyond, you know, making sure that it's a livable wage. So those kinds of things have been added to it. But I think to Marcus's point, you know, the demand for transparency is critical with any of these big funding opportunities, and, you know, an emphasis on hiring those within the community to also benefit from all of the opportunities, I think is critical too.
But I think, Marcus, we'll pay attention beyond the Davis-Bacon wages that are called for in this legislation and others to that oversight. And if the NAACP has proposed language on that, I think we'd love to circulate that, get feedback on that. But point well taken. And Michael, go ahead.
Yeah, I think Jillian Middlestat is now unmuted and had a question to raise.
Sure.
Hi. Yep, just checking you can hear me.
Yes.
Yep.
Excellent. Thank you. And just briefly, I'm Gilead Middlestead. I'm the director of the Tribal Healthy Homes Network and the Partnership for Air Matters. I just have two quick comments. First, just congratulations on getting to this point in history. Literally, it's a major point in time. Two thoughts, kind of following up on what Marcus was saying. As someone who has implemented many HUD, CDC, and EPA grants and worked extensively with those agencies' healthy housing programs and watched them grow, there's still a lot of room, bless them, but there's still a lot of room for improvement in the way that agencies implement those programs. And probably the single most important point I could communicate is that the grants often overlook what a community itself needs to do. So culturally tailored programs, practice-based programs, community-based programs, there's not a lot of latitude for them to put it into the programs when CDC, HUD, and EPA develop the program requirements. And I'm not going to say in a silo, but they don't have the travel budgets to get out into the field regularly. And I would really hate to see this much money put out there without the sensitivity and the awareness and the alignment with community priorities. Second thought, just very briefly, and I'll follow up offline with this, but I would put out there that my concern would be that we have this influx of funds to go in, remediate, remove lead, such a long-standing need, when we now know the science says that, the diesel emissions that infiltrate those homes are neurotoxins. They pass the blood-brain barrier, they pass into the placenta. So to go into a home and remove one source while we also have other sources that are continue to affect, disabilities, learning disabilities, all the other impacts with children that are carcinogenic and mutagenic as well. So my point, even though it sounds like I'm going full circle here, is I'm trying to say that I'd like to tie that weatherization so that filtration and ventilation are done in the home while the lead is remediated. And I know that sounds like a big leap, but I'd hate to walk in, do some really good work, and leave those children and their parents exposed to something 24/7 that's still going on. So I'll stop there and just circle back with you all. Thanks.
No, I think that's just excellent points on the sequencing of work, and something that we work a lot on our holistic housing model, and hope to be soon showing that in a number of different demonstration projects coming out of New York and other places. But I think the sequencing of how that work is done, so we're not leaving hazards, but that also goes to good containment and alignment of health and safety. One of the things that we hope gets reinvigorated that came out of the Obama-Biden administration was an active interagency work group on healthy housing that included the Department of Energy and the U.S. Department of Housing and Urban Development. Included in those health standards is also the applicability standards for applications that we can get to a uniform standard by which families can receive these monies. If your kid is on Medicaid, or you're on Medicare or WIC or a number of programs, we shouldn't be sending you through 5 and 6 applications for approval to get streams of funding. So we're hoping that we can continue to reduce those barriers and then allow at the city and county level for it to flow in an aligned, braided, and coordinated way. I also saw one of the comments here that I think is really critical around rural housing and Black and brown communities. Don't just live in urban communities and live in rural communities. And the point made on the message, abundantly true. So I know that recently HUD has put out money around aging in place, fall prevention as part of their Healthy Homes portfolio, and have allocated 50% of that to go to rural communities. We need to do more of that on lead paint and on weatherization dollars. We, for this very particular reason, many years ago, opened an office in Mississippi to ensure that we're laying track in small towns, mid-sized towns, but also rural communities. And we will certainly take that note and try to pay special attention in each of these pieces of legislation. Corinne, have you all taken up rural communities on your work?
Ruth Ann, this is Vanessa. Can you hear me?
Yes, indeed. Was
Yes, thank
it
you.
your comment, right?
Yes, it was my comment.
Well,
I
you
too
didn't
like Mark.
go to town.
I am also like Marcus. I chaired the president of our NAACP chapter for 8 years, and then I did not run or seek a re-election for any office. I had signed on as a 3-year commitment to the Robert Wood Johnson Foundation with health. And my work is environmental health and land reuse. And so at that time, we were working on remediation of a high school with asbestos and lead-based paint. And we had that problem. We're an African-American community in the rural part of Southeast Missouri. And I work with 5 counties, is what's called the Missouri Boot Heel. It's the poorest section of the state in the middle of the nation. And it grieves my heart that so much money, as Marcus talk about, is being floated around this country and nothing is coming to the communities of frontline, marginalized communities that need it. And we try hard to play by the rules and make sure that every dime and dollar go exactly where it's supposed to go when we are given the opportunity. And we did this. But the people who came to do the work, they did everything they could not to hire local source. I got so frustrated with even speaking with my project officers that not that they should intervene, but attend the meeting. They couldn't get that done. And so what I had to do, being the project manager, was to withhold payment. That's the only way everything come to a screeching halt. It's about the money and they're not doing the work. And I had to have a call with 6 finance officers from that grant that we were given. And I just let them know exactly how I felt, how the money was going, how the support was lacking, and they understood. So I'm just wondering, why should we seek after this money? We need it for the community's benefit. The housing is substandard, is deteriorating while you're working on one thing, everything else is falling down. Infrastructure, I mentioned that it's deemed to be roads and bridges. That's what is we need the worst. The counties make these decisions once it leaves the state level, but you got communities whose entire systems are falling apart. The wastewater, it's just hard to try and mediate with the organizations or agencies that are supposed to make sure that parity is given across the board and consider those that are in most need. And so I'm back from my 3-year hiatus as alumni now, cohort 1 with Robert Wood Johnson. They only focus on health, but my project of remediation and making the community better caused them to look at things in a different light because they only see things on a health perspective. But I had to help them understand there's an environmental problems that are in minority and marginalized communities that affects their health. So they gave us partial funding to get work done, but I'm still an alumni and I still go in and try to help them understand on the ground, the many hats that we wear as an executive director. I'm in the trenches too. We have to stay focused and grounded. So I thank you for mentioning that, but that's a critical thing to us. And I'm the billions and billions that are out here. Are they going to pass over our head again, or are we going to try to get some honest, lookovers of our proposals and understand the need for those that are reviewing applications?
Well, Vanessa, thank you. And very smart of a foundation that I dearly love, the Robert Wood Johnson Foundation, for supporting you. And but I would say 2 things to this. One, to move to at least a tenor of even more bipartisan work. Lead has always been a more bipartisan issue than many, but we have to pay attention to rural communities. We have to listen to rural communities, one of the most overlooked, flown over segments of our population. But I do think local hiring is such a critical part to that, but also capacity building dollars on the workforce side. that will build the capacity necessary to the long disinvested communities. One of the most challenging visits I've made in my life was to West Helena, Arkansas, and to see how we've left rural communities behind on issues of lead and unhealthy housing. So I know that we'll be committed to paying attention to that, advocating for that, and want to stay in connection with you. I want to honor time here. If you have more questions, please feel free to email us. My email is ranorton@ghhi.org. And if you want to get in touch with Corinne, I'll ask you to share yours. It should be up on the screen, my friend. Sorry for not having it up there, but we'll also get it to you and others. But we really do hope that what we will hear from is what are you striving to do and how do we support you? Thank you, Corinne, for sharing that in the chat. And how can we advance this work together? We think it is critical. But what we ask is that no one allow this time to go past without our ability to go to scale on lead remediation in housing. We will be looking obviously at other aspects of the healthy housing work and the climate, health and energy side of that as well. But I want to give Corinne the last word and thank everybody for joining us. Please look forward to the toolkit and the continued messaging. And please, if you are so inclined, please go online and express your support for the Legacy Pollution Act, the Lead Safe Kids Act, and other legislation that is moving this needle forward. Corinne, you get the last word.
Thanks, Ruth Ann.
Brightest person gets to go last.
I think we all really understand the very small window of opportunity that we have to move really critical legislation along to address these issues that we care deeply about. And I think as long as we're doing so organized and as efficiently as possible, we can really make a really good mark this year. So happy to be in coalition with you all and have a great day.
Thanks, everybody.